Well, welcome back to the Munn Avenue Muse podcast, brought to you by the MunnAvenuePress.com. We are a podcast that shares both author stories and helpful information from people that help us sell our books. And I'm so glad today to have one of those people with me, and a longtime friend and co-conspirator, David Ratner, who David has over 25 years of experience focused on book publicity, brand, and thought leadership development, relationship building, and consulting related to the publishing industry. In other words, he specializes in books and book marketing. He's worked with hundreds of best-selling authors from all genres. David's a strong believer in partnership versus vendorship, and works with his clients to customize the most appropriate and efficient campaigns based on their goals, needs, and budgets. David's been a featured speaker at a number of publishing conferences and well respected for his knowledge in the industry. David, welcome to the Munn Avenue Muse podcast. It's so great to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me. And God, that guy sounds impressive that you're talking about.
I think that's you, right? I think that you. It looks like you.
I appreciate you having me today.
Well, it's great to have you. So, David, tell us a little bit. How did you get involved in this? What got you started?
Well, I mean, this is back in the day when, we used to find our first jobs in the newspaper, and I just happened to answer a small ad in the paper. Went in and met with a guy who had a company that was a small company that was promoting authors. I didn't really understand much about it at the time, but it was at the time a pay hike for me, and I was thinking, we'll try it, and moved into this company. Stayed there for 16, 17 years, helped build it from a 3 or 4 person company up to, at times up to 25 and 30 people, and work with every major publisher and hundreds of best-selling authors in all different walks of life. And that began that journey, I guess, or my journey in the book PR and marketing and promotion world.
Yeah, well, I didn't mention in your bio, but one of the things I think you bring besides skill in placing media is you're a resource for many other avenues, and I want to talk about that in a little bit. But so before we get to that, tell me how, in your long career in PR, how has it changed? I mean, we went from traditional media to digital. Right. What does that mean for me as an author, for example?
Yeah, for authors, there's a lot of blessings that come along with this, in that, look, 15, 20 years ago, everybody wanted to be an author. But it wasn't always easy, because the only model really was a traditional publishing model where you had to either find an agent or go through a publisher directly to try to get your book published and such. And then that's been disrupted tremendously, and a lot of that is with the advent of technology and wisdom and such, because today anybody who wants to be an author can be an author and write a book. And the services out there to authors to publish, whether you do it simply through Amazon at an extremely reasonable price, or you work with a great company like yourself at Munn Avenue, or other hybrid publishers, self-publishing outfits, there's just tons of ways to go out there and get that book done. And the other part of that is the advantages that traditional publishers used to offer are not quite the advantages that they once were. For an author who wants to have more control, the self and hybrid models are great. Speed to market, all of these kinds of things make a difference. And the biggest, I think, advantage traditional publishing used to have was distribution. Getting books into stores. But Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Kobo, and others, they've just leveled the playing field. And everybody has distribution now. And if I want your book tomorrow, I press a button on Amazon, and guess what? It shows up at my door. And it's printed on demand. So it's just an incredibly different world from the publishing side of it. And it's certainly impacted the promotional world as well.
Okay, so recognizing that, and it's a complicated and nuanced field, if I am, I know you have a particular strength in nonfiction and business books that we've worked on together.
Yeah.
If I am an executive publishing my first business book, what's essential for me to know to get to a wide audience? What would you recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like a lot of things, you need to start with your why. Okay, why am I writing this book? What is the goal? I would say that for 90% of my clients, most of them certainly want to sell books, but the goal for them is to utilize the book as a brand equity tool to raise broader awareness for their business practices, their speaking practices, their thought leadership, as a way to validate their authority, as a way to generate shareable content for their social marketing and sales channels. And some, truthfully, just scratching an altruistic itch. I've worked with some very successful people who feel like they've accrued some tremendous wisdom that they want to share with other people. So once you understand, and if your goal is strictly to sell books, then you have to be a little bit more conservative in how you approach promotion, because the results of promotions typically are subjective. You can get somebody all the media coverage or all the great advertising and other things, but in the end, somebody else has to take an action to buy that book or go to that person's website or any of those other things. So I think really understanding the why is important. The beauty of books is that as a product, books get a free pass because they're information, they're education, to a certain extent they're entertainment. And so sometimes it's easier to promote that person and what they are doing under the auspices of the book versus trying to promote something that they are selling, a service, a training, a product, etc. And that's why books are such a great tool.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And for the nonfiction business author, consultant, the book becomes a calling card. Correct. It becomes sales support. And between what you do and what we do, because I'm very interested in my own books and for our authors to get to a wide audience, between us, we get books into the hands of thousands of people.
Yep.
Now, what can result from that is word of mouth. If it's fiction, then it might be more readership, reader reviews, international exposure, because Amazon is in 20 plus countries, and then we publish through Ingram as well, which gets us to 100 plus countries, so you get that. And I think a very important thing that people miss is by creating activity, you excite Amazon's algorithms to show your book more. And the more you show your book, the more you will sell and more audience you will get. And the more that happens, the more they show it. It's kind of like a virtuous cycle.
Absolutely.
And I know how effective you've been with business books. There's one we worked on together that was on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list for all books. I think it was number 3, which is quite an accomplishment. Have you found that you can also help authors that write fiction?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of different services that can be done for authors. It's a little bit trickier on the publicity side because there's not the same kind of media exposure. It's not as easy to generate traditional media exposure beyond reviews and such, unless it's a piece of historical fiction or the author's background is very much tied. It's a spy novel and they worked for the CIA, and you relate it to current news or things along those lines. But there's lots of sort of marketing initiatives that can be done, whether that's through Amazon ad campaigns, whether that's through Amazon or Barnes & Noble bestseller campaigns. There are services that do provide guaranteed sales, guaranteed reviews. So yeah, there are a number of different ways that we can help fiction authors reach broader audiences for sure and scale.
Right. And it goes back to what you pointed out a couple of minutes ago. The why are you doing this is a very important question. And with most of the authors we work with, and even with me, I've written 6 books myself. The first 4 are thrillers. I just wanted to be read. I wanted a wide audience. And I think that's a very healthy goal.
Yep.
Whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction. If you're looking to get rich from selling from royalties, that doesn't happen that often. I mean, yes, you can make some money from royalties, but I wouldn't quit your day job so quickly.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I tell that to my clients. I'm very transparent up front, because a lot of times I'll have an author say to me, well, David, if I engage in this publicity campaign with you, how many books should I plan to sell? And my answer is always start with 0. And if the work that we do is valuable enough to you as a marketing investment in yourself, your business, and your thought leadership, or whatever it may be, let's continue the conversation. But if your goal is strictly an ROI-driven goal from book sales, you need to be conservative in terms of how you approach it. Because it's not easy selling books. The way business authors typically sell books successfully is more en masse, right? So it's selling to companies who will buy in bulk in return for them doing a webinar, or just because of client relationships, those kinds of things. But it's a tough world to make money in, for sure.
And there's other goals that can be quite satisfying. We've worked with a number of authors who have written memoirs.
Yep.
They've been through enormous challenges and come out the other end and been successful.
Yep.
And they want to share their story, and they want to inspire others, which I think is a great goal. So it's very important for them to be read widely.
Right.
Yes, they'll earn some royalties, but that's not the primary goal.
Right.
And related to that, some of those are older people that have retired and had an amazing career and have life lessons to share. That's a good cause too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then with the kind of writing I do and our fiction authors, yes, I want to entertain first, but I find it more interesting to include things that people might want to learn. Or there are moral quandaries or philosophical or psychological questions, which adds dimensions to it. I've always believed, and this is true of public speaking as well as writing, is if you can entertain people first, they'll be receptive to a message. So that's why even in nonfiction, and we work with several talented ghostwriters as well, they can take subjects that can be rather dry and make them fun and interesting. And at the heart of that is storytelling.
Yeah, and look, it's not always what you say. It's oftentimes how you say it, right? I mean, when you look at personal finance books, and I use this example a lot, most of them tell you to do the same thing fundamentally, but David Bach came up with the latte factor, and Robert Kiyosaki had the rich dad, poor dad concept, and Susie Orman empowered women. And so they all came up with different ways to relay a similar message in some ways. And that is the entertainment value of it. And that's what separates them from other people who might inevitably tell you the same exact advice, but couldn't do it in a way that was as engaging as the ones who've done it really, really well.
Yeah, I like your specific examples, and it's there's a corollary in fiction in that there's basically only 7 stories that cover all fiction. Whether it's the parent-child conflicts or war and peace, or but it's how they are told.
That's right.
How engaging are they? How interesting are the characters?
Right.
What can I learn from this? Those are the things that make them interesting. And I think what you do and we do together is find the things that are interesting and engaging and amplify them in the media or outside to attract readers.
The term I use a lot, the amplification, right, is that what we do, whether it's from the marketing side or the PR side, it's amplifying it to targeted audiences, and then giving the client, especially more on the nonfiction side, but on the fiction side as well, giving them assets to then re-amplify through their own channels, right? Through
like social media and things
exactly.
like that.
Exactly.
Well, we're, for example, let's say I've written a business book, and it's on personal finance. Where do you try and get visibility for me?
Yeah, so much of it today comes in the digital space, and so it would be on, if we're talking about personal finance, then it would be on financial websites. And then what we try to do is come up with particular angles. So are we talking about personal finance for seniors? And if that's the case, then we're going to go to more senior-oriented websites. Or are we talking about it for women and we're going to target women? We do the same thing in leadership or management or, any of the other sales, marketing. And when we look at an author, if we are doing the, what I would call more brand-driven kind of campaign, which is most of them, I always tell my clients, make sure when we're working together, I want you thinking holistically, right? I don't want you just thinking between the pages. I want you thinking between your ears. You can share whatever it is you want to share. Oftentimes, the book is just a shiny piece of eye candy that's going to open doors to create opportunities for an author. Candidly, a lot of the outlets that we go to, especially a big part of promotion today is authored articles, guest pieces. So whether that happens with a Fast Company or a Forbes or a Fortune or any of these other places, the editors that we're dealing with there, they're not reading the book cover to cover by any stretch. They're going based on a pitch that we've sent them that they say, yeah, this is really interesting. We think this plays into our audience, listeners or readers, and they don't know whether it's content from the book or not. They look at somebody's bio and say, yeah, he's an authority and a good person to write this article. And so, that's where we, how they take it. In a podcast, it's a little bit different. Things can be personalized. You can do more anecdotes. You can push yourself a little bit more. But those are the venues right now that people are getting, and we try to target them very specifically, whether it's niches or verticals, right? So if somebody wants to talk about leadership, but a lot of their clients fall in the manufacturing and pharma space, well, then we ask them to give us talking points related to pharma or manufacturing or finance or wherever it may be. So then we can go to podcasts that target that space, or we can go to online magazines that target that space, or other venues that we're reaching the right audience for them.
Yeah, and as I'm listening to you, I'm just thinking about how, as an author, and most of our authors, they don't have a clue about how to do this. That's why they need you.
Yeah.
And I'll mention it now, I'll probably mention it again later, but if you are interested and would like to talk to David about your book and getting more visibility and exploiting some of these channels, you can find him at Ratner, RATNERPR.com. So David, what are some common mistakes that authors make in this area, or trying to do this themselves?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is thinking that it's a lot easier than it is. That's one thing. I think others sometimes jump into investments that they haven't really fully researched what their options are. I see this happen a lot. Where I have a conversation with somebody and they've told me they've already spent X or Y on a service where I'm thinking in my head I would never recommend that service or that provider. I mean, look, there's a lot of good people in the world that who do what I do and what you do and others, but there's others who are not. There's a lot of people who try to upsell certain services. A lot of the hybrids and self-publishing agents try to upsell services. Sometimes they do it well, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's a money grab. So it's really important that people do their homework before they start jumping into everything. And just because your friend told you it worked for them doesn't mean it's going to work for you necessarily. And like everything else in the world today, it's all fluid. So what was working 3 weeks ago might have changed, right?
Yeah.
So there's a new mousetrap every week in the world that we live in.
Yeah, I try and use sort of a guiding principle working with our authors is this something I would do for myself?
Right. Yeah.
And if it is, I test it on what, my own books first, but and then, I'm willing to share that with our authors. Yeah, I see. And I'm sure you do that. Well, you mentioned it. There's people that I have in learning wasted money on things that didn't work. But you're right. You can research and find out. We have a number of authors that come to us that have either had a bad experience elsewhere,
Right. Same.
or they tried to do it themselves and they got stuck, or they messed it up, and they need help to do it right. And one of the bigger complaints that I encounter from authors we talk to, which I think you and I address well, is that they might work with a hybrid publisher, an independent publisher, and they can't get anyone on the phone.
That's right.
So they have to go through chat or email, and they don't get the personal attention and contact that you and I provide. We have face-to-face meetings on Zoom anyway, or phone calls, and we're reachable, so you can talk to a human being, which seems to be getting harder and harder these days.
Absolutely, and I think that's important because for most people, their book is very personal, right? It's their baby, and they want it taken care of. And yeah, you do want somebody to talk to, and you do want somebody who understands what's going on, who can give you sort of their knowledge and wisdom about it. And look, I take phone calls from people all the time that I'll sit on the phone with them a half an hour, 40 minutes, and I know that they're never going to be a prospect for me. They don't have the resources to spend, but if I can get them to do their next step smarter, I'm happy to do that, right? That's the cost of doing business. It's kind of the world that we live in. I mean, I used to have a slogan on my website that used to go back to some of the mistakes that people make is, you wrote the book, now what? And I think a lot of people don't think about the now what. They write the book. I mean, I'll talk to people, very successful people, who've written a book, and they say, I really haven't thought about my plans for, what I'm going to do with it yet. I'm like, well, now's probably 3 months later than you should have, but I jump in now. But the other thing to know too is that the old school promotion model or old school thinking was that everything was so connected to your publication date, right? That it was so important to get things done in the first 3 months. And that was a lot of it was based on when you did get books into stores. If they didn't start moving, they were going to start to get returned, right? Now that's far less of a concern. But as long as your subject matter is relevant, you can promote at any time. I've worked on some business books that have been out there for 3 years, and the author just decided to do something, because as long as the information is sort of evergreen and valuable, there's no problem with that. So a lot of people, the big focus on pub dates are for people who are trying to do bestseller campaigns and that sort of thing. Most campaigns are what I call bottom-up campaigns, where you're not starting out with the Today Show, GMA, a daytime talk show, a New York Times feature. Most of them are you've got to hit some, in baseball terminology, some singles, doubles, and hopefully some triples before that home run is likely to happen. And the home run's not likely to happen for most. And that's but
a lot of singles and doubles win games.
Absolutely. And they are searchable, they are shareable, they are, and I think that's great. And I think the other thing too is try to understand the world. I'll get a lot of leadership authors who'll say, I'd love to be on Good Morning America or the Today Show. And I'll say to them, do you watch those shows? And they say, no, not really. And I'll say, well, if you did, you would see that they don't have leadership authors on. So that's not your audience, right? And so it's not always the sexy that is the most effective. It's often the most targeted that's the most effective. The sexy's great for your logos on your website and all that stuff, and I don't want to diminish them in any way. But it's like podcasts these days, right? I mean, people say, well, I only want to talk to a podcast if they've got 15,000, 20,000 listeners. Well, you know what? If you can talk to 2,000 of the right listeners, that's far more effective than doing a radio show where there's 25,000 listeners, but you have no idea if any of them are interested in your content, right?
Good point.
These people have subscribed. These people have made the choice to listen to this podcast, your podcast, for instance, because they want to learn more about publishing. So everybody who's listening or watching this right now is somebody who is interested in publishing in some way, shape, or form. So they're all the target audience in some way.
That's true. And you mentioned something there too that I think is important and does reflect a change in the industry, which is when the majority of books were published by traditional publishers, there would be a big push around the publication date. The author might go on book tours for a few weeks. The books might sell for a month or two, and then they just fade into obscurity. But like we do, we run bestseller campaigns. We're running 2 of them this week, and I'm promoting my first book, Not So Dead, which came out 7 years ago. And the first week of January, I'll be promoting that book, and it probably will be a best-selling thriller during that time period. And it's probably the 3rd or 4th time I've done it over 7 years. So books can stay alive now. The other thing we see as well, like when we publish for our authors, we set up the accounts, the Amazon account in their name, the Ingram account in their name, and their books should stay available forever.
Right.
I was talking to an author yesterday who was working with an independent press. They went out of business. The book went out of print.
Yep.
And even the big publishers think that the books go out of print. And I think with our approach and your approach, there's no reason for a book to go out of print, and there's no reason for it to stop selling forever. But if you do nothing, what happens is it drifts into what I call the Amazon graveyard. It doesn't come up in searches, nobody finds it, so you keep doing it.
Right.
And then to your other point about hitting singles and doubles, what I like to say is that usually there's no one thing you do that's going to be that home run or that, break out of the box, but it's 1,000 little things done well.
And that is a massive difference in today's publishing world versus we'll call it the pre-internet publishing world, right? And the pre-streaming networks and everything else. Back in the day, if we got somebody on the Today Show, or we got them on Good Morning America, or Oprah, right, which everybody wanted to be on, you knew that was going to have significant impact on sales. It was going to make a massive difference. Media has become so watered down. There are so many outlets, digital, print, otherwise, that are competing for your attention, that the dilution is what's making it incredibly difficult to sell books. I mean, we've had clients on the Today Show and GMA, and it's barely moved the needle compared to what it would have years ago. And, when we get an author in Fast Company, that you're not going to get tons of one-off sales in those cases, or in most cases. It's a great place to be, and great for the brand and all those other things. So that's why selling books has become such a challenge today, and that's why companies like yours and doing the things that you're doing and other bestseller companies are out there. I mean, people want to make the New York Times list. A lot of them, not the big books, but a lot of them are working with companies that are trying to help orchestrate the best opportunity possible to make the New York Times list. We used to do that with the Wall Street Journal list. It doesn't exist anymore. But there are new lists emerging that there are strategies, let's say, that can help you get onto these lists that people are employing all of the time, and people are spending a lot of money to do it. And again, for me, that just goes back to, make sure you understand your why before you do that.
Right, right. And keep at it.
It's a grind.
The other thing, it's not, doing what you do is not a 1 month thing.
Correct.
I mean, you do, I know occasionally strategize with somebody for a month, but if you really want to penetrate the market, you have to keep at it over time. We do Amazon ad campaigns as an ongoing thing. So like, even though I'm doing this promotion for book number 1 in the first week of January, I'm running Amazon ads on all my books all the time.
Right.
And I found, it was interesting, it was like, I wonder what happens if I just shut it all off. And I did that for 3 weeks, and the sales just drifted down to almost nothing. So if you want to stay relevant, you want to stay engaged, and you want your books to be out there, you gotta be willing to keep at it.
And you have to do it in a multifaceted way today, right? I mean, back in the day, it was heavily focused on media. Media was the number one driver for book sales. Now it's a very complex puzzle. And candidly, the pieces of the puzzle are not the same for everybody, right? Somebody can do these 5 things and have tremendous success, and somebody else can do the exact same 5 things and it not be successful.
Right.
And so there is definitely a little bit of a fishing expedition at times, of throwing some different lines in the water and seeing what sticks and such. But there are not a lot of magic formulas out there, unless you can find them if you want to spend lots and lots of money to do it. But it's not easy.
Yeah, and one thing we passed over in talking about this, because you and I are both, in this sense, marketing focused, but it also has to start with a good book.
Yep.
If your book sucks, all the marketing in the world might get you a blip, but if you start getting bad reviews or things just don't work out, it's not going to do well. It might be back to the drawing board. Now, most of the books that you and I work with are good books, and some of them are great books. And if they have something to offer, I don't raise this as a way to discourage people, but a way to encourage you to really work on really good writing and good editing, and work with a company like us or another company that's going to make sure your book is as good as it can be before you publish it and you promote it. The quality matters in the overall equation.
Yeah, I think it does. I would collegially debate you a little bit on it, that if somebody's written a business book and it's not War and Peace, but the topic is interesting and the source is viable, we can definitely generate good coverage for it. Now, a buyer might say, okay, that sounds interesting, I'm going to go buy it, and then read it and go, this isn't War and Peace, this isn't so good. And they could theoretically go put a review on Amazon that says, I thought this was going to be a really special book because the topic really, interested me in such a way, but having read it, it lacked X, Y, and Z and such. So in the grand scheme of things, I agree with you. Don't forego quality for speed or any of those kinds of things. But it's really about trying to have some sort of unique selling proposition. There are very few spaces that are not crowded. Right? I mean, in the business world, if it's leadership, if it's management, sales, marketing, whatever you're writing on, somebody's written on. And it's hard to distinguish them. And I use this, I always say, like, cancer books, which I've done work on. There are so many amazing stories out there on recovery, but it's hard, because there are so many amazing stories, and how to separate one person's from another is really hard to do. And how many times can an outlet write on it? And in that case, it's very unfortunate, because there's so much great inspiration there. But that's why, again, doing some of the work that we both do, you're trying to separate yourself from the field, and that's what a lot of these services do. That's what a lot of good pitching and publicity can do, as well as to try to distinguish yourself from the crowded pool that you are swimming in.
Well, I think that's a great summation of what you do and ways for authors to think about their book. What makes their book unique? And I also go to what makes the title of the book unique. Yep. But what makes the book unique? Well, David, I so appreciate your coming on and sharing your wisdom and insights. And I will mention again that if you would like to talk to David further, and he really is giving of his time and his expertise, reach out to him at Ratner, RATNERPR.com. Okay. And if you want some help publishing and promoting your book in other ways, please do contact Munn Avenue Press. That's MUNN Avenue Press.com, and listen to the Munn Avenue Muse podcast and share it with your fellow authors.
Yeah, I can tell you, Charlie, from the world that I just as some kudos to you, as what you said before about the personal attention is a big difference maker. And I've worked, you and I have worked on a number of authors and folks that I would highly recommend to you, and that personal touch is huge. But on top of that, the quality of what you do is fantastic. So there's never been a person I've recommended to you that hasn't been thrilled with the work that you've done. So
well, thank you so much, David.
Yep,
and thank you again for sharing your wisdom and expertise. And I hope people that are interested reach out to you at ratnerpr.com.
Yeah, listen, thank you for the opportunity today. I really enjoyed speaking with you about it. And look, if this podcast helps a few people out there in some of the decisions that they need to make about their book, then we did something good today, Charlie.
Great. Thanks again.
Appreciate your time.